Hello, everyone. This is Rosie, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of my podcast called My Intrusive Thoughts. It's literally so hard for me to organize myself in a manner that is equal parts productive and also having fun, like a fun person, because when I put my head into doing something, I feel like I just go all in. And sometimes it can be, very advantageous, but at other times it can be a curse. Because I've tried to record this episode multiple times. And when I say multiple times, I mean literally at least 6 times. And every time I sit down to talk about this book, do this review kind of episode, I just end up being tongue tied and just losing all train of thoughts because there's just so much up here in my head that I want to speak about, but I find that I just get overwhelmed. So I'm gonna try again, and hopefully, this is going to be the final product, and I won't have to go back and re record this because this is such a hassle. I hate myself for this, okay? Having a little hateful moment, but it's okay. We're gonna get through this. As you can probably guess from the title of the episode, we're gonna be talking about a book today. And this is very interesting because I love books. I love talking about books. I love reading books. Anything and everything to do with books, I'm all in. So when I started reading this book, I hadn't yet started doing this podcast. So I didn't go into it, making notes or whatever. So I had to literally halfway through when I actually started doing the podcast, I was like, oh, because I'm reading this book, how about I talk about it when I'm done with it? So I had to go back and sort of reread some stuff and come up with like pointers that I could use for this episode. And I guess that helped, but also we're going to talk about this later in the episode, but it kind of backfired on me a little bit because I just have too much information about this book in my head that I don't think I wanted in the first place. Like, yeah, when you read a book and you're really into the plot and everything, and in the time that you're reading it, you're so immersed and, you're giving it your all. But then once you're done, you want to sort of detach yourself from it a little bit because it can get overwhelming sometimes. If you are a person like me who reads a lot of true crime, thriller, suspense novels with a lot of dark themes and like heavy gore stuff like death and murders and stuff, constantly thinking about that can overwhelm you and not a good, sort of thought process to go to bed with. So, yeah, I've had a couple nightmares after I read this book. I'm going to go to bed after recording this, so best of luck to me. I hope I don't wake up sweating and all because, God, this book has driven me up the wall these past few weeks. So, Sharp Objects, a thriller novel written by Gillian Flynn, an American author who you might have known for her other work, which is a very sensationalized story called Gone Girl. And if you haven't read that, good for you. I don't know. But yeah, this book I sort of did not know about because I came across Gone Girl by pure chance. Like I was scrolling through my Tumblr and I saw some stills from the movie adaptation of the book and they seemed pretty interesting to say the least. I'm not gonna talk about that because this is solely gonna be about Sharp Objects, so I don't want to go on a tangent here. But yeah, that's how I discovered Gillian Flynn, and I read the book Gone Girl, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed her narration style. I really enjoyed the characters. They were witty. The plot itself was very rich and complex, and I really liked her writing style. Yeah, so I read Gone Girl and then I went back to the bookstore looking for other books, and then the shopkeeper was like, "Oh, why don't you check this one out? It's by the same author." And I was like, "Okay, I'll get it." And I think a good thing that I did or did not do was I did not search for this book before I started reading it, because if I had searched, I think I wouldn't have read it. And the reason why I say that is because even though the plot was very nicely written and the characters were good, very complex, and everything, the overall feel of the novel itself is so disturbing, so dark, so violent, that it kind of gets under your skin in a way that you just can't help but feel all of that. It's not a nice feeling. It's dark and it's disturbing, very disturbing actually. So yeah, but I'm glad that I still got to read it, and I really enjoyed it actually. So before I start talking about the plot and the characters and the story and all those details, I would like to give you a warning, because I feel like this book deserves a warning in big bold letters in red, so everybody can see it from like miles away. So we're going to be talking about very disturbing themes related to murder, related to abuse, related to trauma, related to just a lot of dark things basically. So if you are triggered by any of that, feel free to just, skip out on this one. Personally, when I start a book, I always look at the blurb. I read the synopsis because it usually gives you an idea of what the book is going to feel like. You can just, pick out the sort of theme and the summary of the story, or, some idea what the plot is about. So I'm going to read you out the blurb of this book, Sharp Objects, and then we can discuss how I felt about it. And yeah, so it says, fresh from a brief stay at a psych hospital, reporter Camille Preaker faces a troubling assignment. She must return to her tiny hometown to cover the murders of two preteen girls. For years, Camille has hardly spoken to her neurotic, hypochondriac mother or to the half-sister she barely knows. A beautiful 13-year-old with an eerie grip on the town. Now, installed in her old bedroom in her family's Victorian mansion, Camille finds herself identifying with the young victims, a bit too strongly. Dogged by her own demons, she must unravel the psychological puzzle of her own past if she wants to get the story and survive this homecoming. Right, so as far as blurbs go, this was very neat. I remember when I was standing in the bookshop and reading this, I got hooked on to the plot right away because, we get introduced to this protagonist of ours, Camille Preaker, and we know that she's freshly out of a mental institute for reasons unknown, and now she has to go cover this story for a series of murders that are happening in her hometown, but also the fact that she has to go back and reconcile with her family that she seems to not be on great terms with. And that whole idea was very catchy, very mysterious. So right away, I was like, oh, yes, I'm all in, I'm game. And I bought the book and I started reading it. Alright, as far as the plot goes, on the whole, I feel like it was very well written, and the sort of story that it presented, the characters that we see, they were also complex. They all had some sort of issues going on, and the resolution was somewhat, predictable, but not at the same time, which I really enjoyed. With suspense novels, usually there's some sort of guessing going on. There's always guesswork, and that is part of why you enjoy reading such books, because you can look at characters, analyze them, and make a guess of what you think might have happened, and then that is what drives you to read more and get to the end to find out what happened. With this book, there certainly was that whole thing, but the story, the way it unfolds eventually, it was so predictable, but not at the same time. Because yeah, I mean, I made guesses myself. I was like, oh, this could be the killer. Oh, that could have happened, and somewhat, I was right in some parts, but others, I was just like blown away. Like, what the hell? And I really enjoyed that aspect of this book. But on the other hand, I feel like there is so much violence. There's this darkness that surrounds every character, which makes you sort of hate them. And I did not like that. It shows a very volatile, very dark, very oppressive nature of human beings. And the story, I mean, it goes well with the story, and it goes well with the sort of underlying theme that the whole book has. But if I were to look at all these characters individually, I feel like there's not a single character in the story that I could relate to or would want to relate to on any level, because they are just so twisted, they're so sick in their heads, as people. And I just, god, I it was a whole mess. But I think that is part of the beauty, that's part of the allure of the novel itself, how dark and mysterious and just twisted everybody was. So I enjoyed that. So the story starts with Camille being told by her boss that she has to return to her hometown, and she has to try to find inside scoop and come up with a story to publish. And so, very reluctantly, she agrees and packs up and starts her journey towards Wind Gap, Missouri. And on the way, she is having all sorts of thoughts. So, the story is narrated by her. So, we see everything happening from her point of view. And by the time she reaches Wind Gap, uh, the second murder has not yet been confirmed. So Natalie is missing, but she hasn't been confirmed to be dead. So there's a whole search party going on. Like, right off the bat, she goes off and joins the search party and tries to talk to different people and find, all these anecdotes and make her story. And over there, while the search party's going on, she notices this bunch of girls, teenage girls, that are sitting around and completely detached, and they have no concern or the frenzy that everybody else is showing. Nothing, none of that sort. And they're just actually making fun of all these people being out and about, trying to search for this missing girl. And then she goes back home very reluctantly and gets a very, how to put it, off welcome by her mother, which we are introduced to, Adora Krellin. And this woman, first of all, right off the bat, her first interaction with Camille raises your hackles, because not only is she so aloof and not motherly at all, it's just the way she carries herself. It just it she seems very off right from the start. So as you go along and you get to know her more, you sort of understand that she is a character that you would probably remember for a long, long time, and for all the wrong reasons. I just have to put it out there, because every time I think about Adora, I feel so angry. And at the same time, I feel so frustrated, and I feel bad for Camille and Emma and Marianne, who had to deal with her as their mother. Because if there's one thing that I absolutely hate, it's people being rude, or people harming, or people, not treating children properly, with care, with love. And this is my trigger. Anything to do with children, any sort of bad thing that any adult does to a child, I can't handle it. And so this story was particularly very hard for me to digest, because it deals with that. It deals with this bunch of preteens being murdered. And then there's Camille with her childhood trauma, and Marianne's death, and Adora and her childhood. And as the story progresses, the body of the second girl is also found, and she's also actually there when the body gets discovered by these two elderly people, and it's wedged in between a parlor or something. And the most horrifying detail that everybody notices is the fact that both the girls had been somehow tampered with, so their teeth were pulled out. After the girl gets discovered, obviously she then goes to the police and she's trying to find something that she could maybe include in her paper, and then she visits the families of the bereaved. And the whole thing was so realistic, in the sense that Camille as a reporter she is a boss ass bitch. Okay, that's the only word I can describe her as. She is very driven. She will go to any lengths to do what she needs to do to get her job done, and she's very particular about it, and she's very honest with it, and she is so enthusiastic about this. Even though there's so much going on in her head, she has just come back from a mental institute, and she's not really on good terms with her family herself. And this whole thing is sort of triggering and traumatizing in itself. And the fact that she's slowly getting that feel that these girls were so much like her. So she's sort of forming these opinions in her head, but at the same time, she's also trying her best to find a story. So she's visiting all these people, even though she doesn't want to. And on top of all of that, the big reveal, the fact that she self-harms. And that really took me by surprise. I mean, I think I thought when, in the beginning of the story, when they start talking about her coming back and the death of her half-sister who died when she was very young, I felt like it was more, along the lines of depression maybe, because obviously that's a very traumatic thing to go through, your baby sister dying, and then witnessing that and remembering that in the great detail that she does. But more so was the fact that she harmed herself. So for some time, I couldn't understand what was going on. But then on top of that, she not only self-harms, she carves words into her skin. So it's not just her doing it, on a whim or something. She takes extra, like the fact that she put all that effort. I mean, there's self-harming, there's cutting yourself, there's slashing your wrists or whatever. But it's even more sick to sort of imagine somebody carving words, and because it's more personal, it's more intentional, and that hurt. Okay, that really made me feel very disturbed and not okay at all, just thinking of that. And I kind of in my head tried to, like, the narrative shift suddenly, when you come to learn about this, and then you look at her and you realize that this girl is broken. She is broken. Okay, not only does she have this whole past trauma to do with her baby sister that's dead, but also her mother, who treats her like shit. The way Adora behaves around Camille is so weird. She's petty. She is throwing tantrums. Adora, I mean. And she is just being full on nasty, okay? All of the things that she says to Camille. And it showcases a lack of maternal love, affection, any sort of connection that you have as mother-daughter. Nothing of that sort. So that makes you feel so bad for her. But then on top of that, that she is going through this whole cycle of feeling so, I mean, how traumatized would she have had been for her to resort to such lengths? It is very hard to kind of reconcile with the idea of a small town, where everybody knows everybody's business. And then the fact that there is such a huge kind of mystery brewing right under everybody's noses. And the fact that Camille and her mother and her sister, they all have all these secrets that they're trying to hide. and put on this facade of perfection, of being a happy family. It's just all too much to take in, but at the same time, it's just so, it makes sense. I don't know why it does, but it made sense how or why these people behaved the way they did. And it was very interesting to see Gillian portray all these characters and their thought processes, and just giving you, a front row seat to the workings of people of different eras, of different uh, people being in different stages of their lives, and how they dealt with that, and what sort of mentality every person had, and how they lived their life according to these principles and these mentalities. It was equal parts witty, it was equal parts entertaining, and it was equal parts sickening, because every character has some sort of mental issue going on with them, some sort of illness that they're dealing with, and then there's that, but also the kind of facade that they have created, the persona that they showcase, and that persona is so different from what they actually are. So at one point in the story, you start doubting everybody. You're like, I can't trust anybody. And on top of that, I felt like the interactions that everybody was having, although some of them seemed very mundane, the way she goes and she visits all these people, just trying to get an inside scoop, just trying to sort of figure out what the hell was going on, because a long time passes and nobody is coming up with any sort of leads. The police is not cooperating with her, and the detective that she's working with is not really helping her. I mean, Richard was the character that made sense, and I think he is the most likable out of everybody, given the kind of personality he had and the fact that he wasn't out there butchering, kids. But even then, it is later revealed that he was, when it all comes down and, the truth is revealed finally, uh, and then Camille figures out that he was just there to use her to get information, because she was the person that had all the intel, and she was going around meeting all these people, so she had all the gossip, hot gossip. So as a detective, I thought that was genius thing, but also fucked up, because this girl, with her traumas and everything that she had faced in her life, I don't think she needed that on top of all of that. But it was a story, and he played his part, and I felt like he played it well. The character was pretty relevant to the story the way it was. So one of the major themes of the story was grief, and how it sort of influences a person, and in turn influences a whole society, and how we as a society have these ideologies on how to express grief, how to process it, and how to deal with it. So we see that obviously Camille, having this entire past of her half sister being dead, and now these girls dying, all of that, she's already on some level very much affected. But then she comes back and she sees all these people, and she gets all these different responses. There's Amma and her gang of preteen girls who are bullying everybody, and just making it look like it's a circus show, and just laughing and joking about all of this. And then there's all these elderly women who are just there for the hot gossip and just to have a good time. This was the most exciting thing that had happened in the town, so everybody was kind of involved in some way, because they wanted to be a part of this whole mystery, just so that they had something to do with their lives other than the normal dull boring lives that they were leading. And it made so much sense, for a small town like that, for there to be a serial murderer on the loose was as exciting as it gets. So to see how all of these people were kind of coming up with their gossip and their assumptions, and it was so very relatable. But also the way they were talking about other people, the families, the bereaved families, of course. So basically, Natalie's brother, John, basically he's presumed to be the murderer. He becomes a prime suspect for the murders, and the reason that people assume him to be the murderer is because he's a little too sorrowful. He's a little too sad about the murders, and then he doesn't have an alibi. But that's another thing. But the one thing that everybody was focusing on was the fact that he kept crying about it, and that was really deep. Cause I've I've been through a similar situation where I've lost a loved one, and I know that dealing with grief for everybody is different, right? So that really hit close to home. And then the whole idea that since he was a man and he was crying too much, just meant that it was his guilty conscience playing, because men are quote unquote supposed to be these strong, creatures who do not show any emotions. So for him to be showing all that emotion was abnormal for these people, which was sick, but that is just a harsh reality of life that we still see everywhere. And then there was Camille herself. The way she processed the death of her sister and the way she was dealing with the deaths of these two girls, how hyper fixated she was to find out what was going on. And then because of her self harm tendencies, she was always so hyper aware of all these sharp objects around her. Her mother actually had all the knives and forks and any of the sharp utensils that you have around in a kitchen locked up because of her, of her doing this. So, and when she was around other people, she was always so conscious about, like, tips of the ballpoints and then paper, the edges of the paper and stuff like that. So, you understand that she was not in an emotional state to be doing this. She was vulnerable. But at the same time, she was just being so reckless and so impulsive in stuff that she did. And that stemmed from the drive to find out what had happened. And then the fact that she kept making all these connections between, herself, her mother, Marianne's death, and then Emma. Like, she was in a toxic environment, and it just kept playing with her. She was drinking day and night. Oh my god, like, if I could get cirrhosis just from reading about Camille drinking, I think I would probably be dead by now, because that's how much she was drinking, just to keep the edge off, just to not let herself get overpowered by the urge to cut. And then on top of that, the way her mother was treating her was also horrible. My feelings for Camille's character were so out of sorts, but then I realized that two things can happen at the same time. I mean, you can love her and feel bad for her for all the trauma that she has gone through in her life in regards to her sister dying, and then her not being on good terms with her mother growing up, and then her self-harming tendencies, sort of making her distance herself from others and creating this wall, and being so emotionally scarred that she just doesn't know what to do with herself at times. But on the other hand, you see that you hate her for her impulsiveness. You hate her for the way she's such a people pleaser. And I guess that also stems from all the trauma that she has been through. The fact that her mother has never loved her entire life, and she's not subtle about it either. So you see that sort of has manifested itself in a way that she craves that attention. She wants that love and affection, but she is scared to reach out for it actively. Hence the fact that she has not been with anybody romantically for a while. But at the same time, when Emma tries to warm up to her or offers her to take her to this party where they end up doing drugs together, which was red flag. I think the biggest red flag ever. Like, I wanted to slap Camille for that. Like, I had to put my book down and take it in. The fact that she sat there with a bunch of teenagers, not even teenagers, preteens. They were barely 13 at that point, and do drugs just because she wanted that approval from her half sister, even though she knew that what she was doing was wrong. But that urge to make her feel good, the fact that she couldn't say no to her sister, or she couldn't see her get disappointed by her, it felt too real, but also too stupid. But then there's Adora, a whole character in herself, and her backstory is that she wasn't loved by her mother because she grew up in a time where openly showing affection was frowned upon, and women especially were supposed to act a certain way, dress a certain way, and the Victorian style of being reserved and prudish and conservative. So that's the kind of upbringing that she comes from. And then we see that she gets pregnant with Camille at a very young age. And then as Camille grows up, she is not really taken with her. She does not show any maternal instinct towards her. And then Marianne comes along. And with Marianne, it's a different story. So Camille sees her mother being affectionate towards Marianne, and she's constantly sick. So she sees her mother doting on her sister and showering her with all that love and affection and taking care of her, but none of that when it comes to herself. So that definitely traumatizes her. And then her sister dies, which is, I think, the worst thing that could happen to a child. And for somebody who is in that stage of life where they don't exactly grasp the meaning of death, but they witness it and it's real and they're trying to understand and process it. But at the same time, this time where she needed that love, that support from her mother to tell her that everything would be okay, she did not get that. That must have emotionally scarred her. So she has some pretty deep traumas that she is dealing with. I think the most fascinating thing about this book was how Gillian has presented hurt and how people process it in different ways. So we have Adora on one side, who was not loved by her mother, and then she became pregnant at a young age, and then she had Marianne, and she did not sort of grow up in a loving environment, and she internalized all of that. She was made to act a certain way and dress a certain way and present this facade in front of people and not show her emotion. So she bottled up all that hurt and she ended up internalizing it. And then it sort of manifested itself in the form of Munchausen proxy. Munchausen by proxy in this case, because she became that adult that harmed her own child just to get attention. And you see that it stems from the fact that she wasn't loved in her childhood, and it was very deep. Okay, this whole backstory makes you actually think about how much a child's upbringing, her environment, a child's the adults, the relationships around them can affect them so vastly, so greatly, and the impact that these sort of things have on kids is just it's a lot. And on the other hand, you had Camille, who lost her baby sister and who was never properly loved by her mother or never shown affection by a parental figure in any way. Even Alan, the husband, which is Marianne and Emma's dad. He's also a very cold character. He just, keeps to himself, and he's very naive in the sense that he believes every word that comes out of Adora's mouth. And at one point, he even, berates Camille for making her mother feel bad because she was just out here doing her job. And that somehow made her mother feel bad. And he made it sound like she was the one bullying Adora, which just incensed me to no end. I was like, does this student have no brains? Or is he just pretending to be this thick? Like, what the hell? What's your deal, Alan? So you see that all of that has emotionally scarred Camille to the point that the only emotional release that she finds for herself is cutting. But I think the sickest of all is the portrayal of these kids. Oh my, these kids in this town are the worst. They're the worst nightmare of any parent because the kind of things that they indulge in. I mean, as a teenager, of course, everybody has had some wild experiences, me included, duh. But this town in particular, these girls, Emma and her bunch of, idiots that she hangs out with, all of them are just wild, and I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that they did what they did. And it showcases the loss of innocence that surrounds these people. Even though they live in such a tight-knit small community, you see that there's a lot that goes on behind closed doors, and everybody is just living their lives. And I feel like a lot of them are aware of the bad things that are happening, but they just choose to pretend that it's all sunshine and daisies and all these things are not happening. And you see that with other people as well. So when she goes out and talks to the family of the victims, they all paint this picture of these innocent girls, even though there are rumors and there are stories about them having anger problems or other stuff like that. So everybody's biased in their own way, and everybody's trying to put up a front, show something that they're not. So there's layers to each character, and it was very nice and interesting to see them interact and for Camille to figure it out, even though at times the stuff that she did to actually get to the bottom of the mystery was downright ridiculous. She sleeps with Natalie's brother, and I understand that, on some level, they were sort of bonding over the deaths of their dead sisters, and I get that. But it's not okay for a grown ass adult to be sleeping around with a barely adult child. Like, he was barely what, 18, 19? I don't know. I don't remember, but that was pretty ridiculous. But that was her character. She was impulsive. She did things just so that she could get to where she wanted to be. So she was, I mean, you could say that she was driven in that sense, and she was very motivated, oriented. But, sometimes you have to draw a line, okay, Camille? Honey, you can't just be doing hard drugs with your 13-year-old sister just so that you can please her and bond with her. That's not normal bonding between sisters, okay? I mean, if you want to bond with your sister, you take her out to the movies, or you take her out shopping, or you buy her dresses. I don't know. You play dollhouse with her. I don't know. But you certainly don't do drugs with your 13-year-old sister and talk about having sex. Like, she's barely 13, and so this depiction of these kids growing up way before they had to, just because of the kind of adults they had around them. So that was really deep and very interesting to note. So as the story progresses and Camille sort of starts connecting the dots, and she realizes that there are so many similarities between these girls and how she behaved as a kid, and there's this whole interaction with her mother where her mother basically tells her that she hated her because she was not docile, because she did not listen to Adora or did what she wanted her to do. And she basically tells her that I don't like you and I don't love you. And that was just sick, okay? That was one conversation that made me stop, okay, and go out for a breather, because it was emotionally very draining to read that. I love my mother, and my mother is not very overly affectionate as well, but not to this extent. I could never imagine a mother being like that. And because when you think of a mother, you think of a nurturing presence, you think of unconditional love, you think of security, you think of being being safe, you think of being happy, you think of being looked after, cared for. And then there's Adora, who is everything but. So the whole depiction of a woman being that cruel, being that unmotherlike, I don't know if that's a word, but anything but that. So to see that, it just didn't feel right? So that really sticks with you, the feeling that this is not right. And I feel that sort of fuels your hatred towards her. And I guess this is also a reason why I hate villains that hurt kids more so, because it's just so unnatural to witness. I remember when I read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and when Dolores ends up at Hogwarts and then she's basically bullying Harry and all that. I hate her. I mean, I hated her then, I hate her now. And I think the reason why I hate her more than I hate Voldemort, even though he's literally killed people, okay, he's tried to kill a small baby, a small child, but I still hate Dolores more because of the fact that she's a woman, and you just naturally expect a woman to be nice, kind, nurturing, especially towards kids. You feel like you just associate these motherly instincts, even though the harsh reality of life is that not every woman is born with those instincts, and it is equally possible for a mother, for any woman actually, to not want kids, not have those sort of nurturing feelings towards kids. And so in this setting particularly, it because it plays such a big role in the entire story, it just hits you even more. So by the time that Camille sort of starts figuring out that maybe her mother had something to do with this, she is now presented with the idea that maybe her sister's death was not natural. Maybe everything wasn't as it seemed. So she goes back and she tries to trace uh, her sister's case, and she realizes that there were a lot of fishy things that surrounded that case. And then we met with the nurse that was working at the time that Marianne was in the hospital when she was sick. And then we figure out another side of humans through her, which is that even though sometimes you might find things like this, happening around you, something bad is happening, and you consciously know that this is happening, but you get selfish, right? You can't help but think that, whether or not to fight, whether or not to report, because it may concern your safety. And a lot of times we've seen it happen around us. There was this one thing that a friend of mine said a while ago, and it has really stuck with me, is the fact that we don't know what kind of stuff goes down even in our neighborhood. There could be potential child abuse cases, there could be violence, there could be, I don't know, a psychopath on the loose, and we would not know, because sometimes we are so concerned with our own safety, we are so deeply immersed in our own world that we voluntarily choose to ignore these things. And the same thing happened with the nurse. She knew that Adora was harming that poor child, but she couldn't do anything about it at the time. One, because at that time, for her to speak out about this sort of stuff was frowned upon. Like she said, that for her to blame her mother, Marianne's mother, for harming her would have literally caused a whole riot, basically. And then also because she had her own problems to deal with. So she chose not to pursue that matter anymore. And that eventually led to the death of that poor child. But it's just that even though she did not want to, she somehow became complicit in the death of that poor child. And then the chip falls, and Camille finally realizes that her mother was involved in the death of her sister, and she may or may not have killed these other two girls. And armed with that knowledge, she goes back to the house, and then she realizes that her mother might be trying to do the same with her and Amma as well. And instead of, fighting her on that or calling her out for obviously the things that she'd done, she just goes along with it. Knowing fully well that her mother is feeding her concoctions and weird medicine that makes her feel ill, she lets her mother do all of that because somewhere in the back of her head, she thinks that by letting her mother harm her, she's gonna win her heart. She's gonna win that affection that she so deeply craved. But thankfully, she gets saved, and Adora gets arrested eventually, and Emma moves with Camille to Chicago. So by this point, I for one was like, okay, so we've caught the killer, and now Camille knows that her sister did not die of natural causes, and she's figured out that her mother is suffering from this illness, Munchausen by proxy. So she can have a sense of closure and maybe be able to deal with the grief that she has harbored all this time. But that wasn't the case, okay? The epilogue, which usually is reserved for giving you an idea of what the protagonist's life after the conflict looks like, was a surprise in itself. It was not something that I expected. Or did I? I mean, I had my suspicions from the beginning, and Emma's character was definitely very, very fishy and abnormal in itself. So, but then, there was this part of my brain which was like, that can't be, because that would be just too cliche, right, for her to end up being the killer. But as much as it surprised me and as much as it didn't, the whole concept behind it was what really blew my mind away. And it's such a sensitive topic and it's such a common thing. The jealousy that kids have when it comes to the people they love. Because we all might have experienced that at some time. People who have multiple siblings probably have felt this at some point, where if their mother is being close to another sibling, or if their favorite sibling is being close to another sibling or anything, you feel that jealousy. You don't want to share, right? And the fact that this emotion that can be so innocent at times literally fueled the fire that led Emma to literally kill these poor children and take out their teeth, was just horrifying, okay? That idea gave me chills. And it also made me very, very of my sister. I kept looking at it, like every time she came to my room, I would just give her those scared eyes. I'm just trying to gauge what she's thinking, just trying to figure out if she's gonna kill me in my sleep or something, because my mom loves me more. Because let's face it, my mother loves me more. I'm the first child. I made her the mother she is today, so I had the first claim on her. So yeah, I'm the favorite child. But anyways, so yeah, this whole story was messed up, but also so insightful and so entertaining at the same time. And I really enjoyed just figuring all these things out, just these nuances, all these prejudices, these themes that you see. It was a good read, I would say. Definitely a very heavy, a very stuffy kind of read, because for a lot of people I read afterwards, the fact that this book, the first half is not exactly very gripping, or it's kind of slow in the beginning, so you don't really get curious or want to dig into it right away. It takes a while for the story to start making sense and for you to want to understand and read more. But by the time you get to the middle and towards the end, you just can't stop. So in that sense, it was a kind of slow read and not something that you get sucked into right away. But at the same time, also because of the violent themes in it, all this violence, all this darkness, all these kids doing questionable things and vile things, it just all was too much, and it definitely overwhelmed me a lot. And I had to take breaks. I didn't I think it took me almost 2 weeks to finish this book, because I would read a page, sometimes even half a paragraph, and then I would just be like, no, I need to take a break. I need to just go out, take a breather, think about other things. So I remember I would just sit down and watch comedy shows on YouTube, because I wanted to take my head, out of this whole mess and stop thinking about Amma and her drug habits and the kind of stuff that Camille goes through in her youth. It was a lot. But that just goes to show that, these things happen around us, and people have gone through these things, and they can lead to all sorts of outcomes if not processed correctly. And that was a lesson, definitely a lesson to learn from there. All in all, I would say that this was definitely a very enjoyable read if you're into dark themes and suspense, and the thrill was there, definitely. So I think I would rate this book a 7 out of 10, only because I felt the pacing was a little off. Everything is so slow in the beginning, and then all of a sudden by the end, it's just so much is happening at the same time. And also the epilogue, I just hated the fact that it was a narration on Camille's part, and we didn't see it happen in real time. So it's basically just a recount of everything going down at once, and I felt like it was just a little too rushed. But other than that, I really enjoyed the story. Yeah, I would I recommend this book to other people? I think you have to take it with a grain of salt. This book is not for the lighthearted people. It's definitely got some strong themes, and if you're triggered by any of that, I would suggest you stay away because this book sticks with you. Okay, this book sticks with your conscience, and I don't think that if this is a trigger for you, I don't think this is a good thing to opt for. I've tried Gone Girl. I've read that one as well and really enjoyed that. Uh, and I guess I liked this a little better than that one was because it had more characters in this one. So there was a lot more to explore and a lot more to decipher, and all these interactions were very interesting to see. Oh, there's actually an adaptation for this book as well by HBO, and I'm actually planning to watch it, but then I'm like, oh, I mean, I would watch it for Amy Adams, but at the same time, do I want to put myself through this? I don't know. So I'm still thinking about it. So if you watched it, please let me know what you think. If you read the book, let me know what you think of the book, how you feel, what are your opinions about the plot, the themes, the story itself, everything. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions. And I guess that's it. That is how I'm going to conclude today's episode. I hope you've stuck by, and I hope this has been insightful, helpful in any way. If you have not read this book and you choose to read it after this, I'm just looking at you, okay? I'm looking at you in that way where I'm like, it's questionable that you would listen to all of this and still go ahead and read this. What kind of inspiration did you take from here? Was it the gruesome murders, the MO of pulling the teeth, or was it the Munchausen by proxy? Which actually, to be fair, is a very intriguing topic in itself. So if you do end up taking up this book, let me know what you think. But anyway, I hope you have a good weekend. I hope you have a good week ahead, and I'll probably come back with a new episode next Friday. Till then, stay safe, stay happy. Allah Hafiz.